Now, if you're one of those people about to fight over whether Kosovo is a country or not before the video has even started,
Shut up.
Kosovo is a region that isn't really talked about that much in media, and for good reason. Since becoming independent with American support, it has become a significant center of organized crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and organ theft. Its Human Development Index 0.75, which is the lowest in Europe and comparable to cartel havens like Colombia or countries like Libya, which is a war zone. To understand why it went so wrong, we have to go back to the beginning. Kosovo was never really an empty place, it was settled by various tribes, then later the Roman Empire when it was Christianized, and eventually by Slavic tribes that settled in the 6th and 7th centuries, pushing out much of the Dardanians, or how we know them today, the Albanians. This is truly when the conflict of interest over Kosovo began. In the beginning of the 13th century, the Serbian kingdom would be established. Kosovo ended up becoming the administrative and cultural center of the Serbian Empire at one point. However, this didn't last long, as in the 14th century, the Ottoman Turks came and conquered Serbia, bringing Kosovo under Ottoman rule. People within Kosovo converted to Islam to avoid the jizya tax imposed on non-Muslims, and the region would only be freed in the 20th century. After World War I, Yugoslavia was formed. Within Kosovo, 64% of the population was Albanian, with 3/4 being Muslim. Hostilities between the Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo re-emerged, and Kosovo requested from the League of Nations that it be united with Albania, to which they got no response from the League. Yeah, they were kinda known for being useless. Following World War II, Kosovo became an autonomous region of Serbia within the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia under Marshal Tito's communist regime. And under Tito, the region was actually at peace and life was relatively normal. However, Tito died in 1980 and tensions between the Serbs and ethnic Albanians within Kosovo re-intensified. During the 1980s, the provincial government in Kosovo began to discriminate against the Serbian population in the province, which escalated into ethnic cleansing. This discrimination caused many Serbs to migrate out of Kosovo. Despite this, the communist authorities in Belgrade ignored the Kosovo Serbs, causing more resentment among them. In the late 1980s, Slobodan Milosevic rose to power under a surge of Serbian nationalism. By the end of 1987, he had full control over the Serbian government. In 1989, Milosevic revoked Kosovo's autonomy, bringing it under direct Belgrade control. Furthermore, in 1990, Milosevic passed legislation which ordered the firing of ethnic Albanian state employees, causing tens of thousands of ethnic Albanians in Kosovo to lose their jobs. Due to the elimination of autonomy and widespread human rights abuses, Albanians engaged in peaceful and non-violent resistance in the early 1990s, mainly by creating their own separate institutions within Kosovo. Meanwhile, all this was going on, Yugoslavia was busy ripping itself apart into separate countries. The separatist Kosovo Liberation Army, or as they call themselves UCK, saw an opportunity in this, and they started attacking Serbian government officials in the region. The KLA sought to destabilize the region, hoping that the United States and NATO would intervene. By 1997, the Serbian government had enough of the KLA attacks, and they killed Commander Zahir Pajaziti and 2 other leaders in a highway attack. In February 1998, the United States envoy Robert Gelbart visited the region, and he stated that the KLA was the main initiator of violence and that it had launched what appears to be a deliberate campaign of provocation. However, the US State Department would still not recognize the KLA as a terrorist organization. Robert Gelbart's statement was enough justification for Yugoslavia, however, and they started their own war on terror campaign. To prevent the war from escalating, Russian President Yeltsin reached an arrangement with Milosevic to stop the offensive operations and prepare for talks with the Albanians. However, before any meeting with the Albanian KLA could take place, US diplomat Holbrooke visited Yugoslavia and threatened Milosevic that if he did not stop, what's left of their country would implode. Holbrooke then traveled to the KLA, which sent a clear signal to its supporters and sympathizers that the US was decisively backing them. The situation would get even worse in July 1998 when KLA spokesman Jakub Krasniqi publicly announced that the KLA's goal was the unification of all Albanian inhabited lands. By August 1998, Serbian forces intensified their summer offensive, attacking KLA and Kosovo Albanian villages in the Drnica region, driving thousands into the hills. As villagers were being massacred and bombed, bombed left and right by both sides, the international community initiated mediation efforts. In 1999, the Rambouillet Accords was signed by NATO, which called for Kosovo's full autonomy to be given back and for 30,000 NATO peacekeeping troops to be put in Kosovo, an unhindered right of passage for NATO troops on Yugoslav territory, immunity for NATO and its agent to Yugoslav law, and the right to use local ports, railways and airports without payment. Yugoslavia responded to this accord by telling all sides to fuck off and continuing its campaign against the KLA. However, with a NATO bombardment imminent, on the 23rd of March, the Serbian Assembly accepted the principle of autonomy for Kosovo, as well as the non-military aspects of the agreement, but rejected the NATO troop presence. So, at night on the 23rd of March 1999, Richard Holbrooke returned to Brussels and announced that the peace talks had failed and formally handed the matter to NATO for military action. Hours before the announcement, Yugoslavia announced on national television it had declared a state of emergency, citing an imminent threat of war, and began a huge mobilization of troops and resources. Exactly 47 minutes after Holbrooke's declaration in Brussels, the Secretary General of NATO, Javier Solana, directed the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe to initiate air operations in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. The next day, NATO began the largest aerial bombardment campaign since the end of World War II. The NATO bombing campaign, which lasted 78 days, involved up to 1,000 aircraft operating from Italy in Adriatic-based carriers with the extensive use of Tomahawk missiles. All NATO members except Greece participated, with over 38,000 combat missions flown. For Germany's Luftwaffe, it was their second conflict since World War II, following the Bosnian War. However, NATO had grossly underestimated Milosevic's will to resist, and they began bombing anyone suspected of aiding the Yugoslav military. On the 12th of April, NATO airstrikes struck a railway bridge in Grdelica, hitting a civilian passenger train and killing 20 people. NATO apologized, stating that their train speed and the bomb's proximity meant they couldn't divert in time. However, 2 days later, a NATO aircraft bombed an Albanian refugee convoy, killing around 70 people. NATO admitted the error 5 days later, while Yugoslavia accused it of targeting refugees deliberately. On the 23rd of April, NATO bombed the radio television of Serbia headquarters, killing 16 civilian employees. This was labeled as a war crime by Amnesty International. However, NATO claimed that the bombing was justified because the station was operated as a propaganda tool for the Milosevic regime. On the 7th of May, NATO bombs hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, killing 3 Chinese journalists and outraging Chinese public opinion. The United States and NATO later apologized for the bombing, saying that it occurred because of an outdated map by the CIA. NATO also bombed Rambouillet prison, killing 100 Albanian prisoners. Despite the heavy bombardment, Milosevic was not giving up. And British Prime Minister Tony Blair began calling for a NATO ground invasion. US President Bill Clinton refused, which resulted in Tony Blair preparing its own separate British force of up to 50,000 troops to be sent into Yugoslavia. At the same time, Finnish and Russian diplomatic negotiators continued to try to persuade Milosevic to back down. After 70 days of bombing, on the 3rd of June 1999, Milosevic surrendered and accepted an international peace plan approved by the parliament after a heated debate, which ended in a fistfight. However, only a week later, on the 10th of June, NATO ratified the agreement and halted air operations. To me, it seems that NATO delayed the agreement to prolong the bombing of Yugoslavia, as they didn't even stop after Milosevic surrendered a week earlier. But who am I to judge? By the end of the war, the total number of refugees and displaced persons totaled more than 1.5 million. However, just 2 days after the Kosovo War ended, the world came dangerously close to an even greater crisis. Early on the 11th of June 1999, a column of 30 Russian armored vehicles carrying 250 Russian troops who were part of the international peacekeeping force in Bosnia moved into Kosovo, Serbia. Only a day later, on the 12th of June 1999, Norwegian and British soldiers were the first NATO forces to enter Pristina. But when they arrived at the airport, Russian troops had already been deployed there first. A standoff between both sides ensued, and despite warnings that antagonizing the Russians could harm peace efforts, NATO's Kosovo General Clark ordered the runway to be blocked and to destroy the Russians. The British commander on the ground refused, saying, "I'm not going to start the Third World War for you." Negotiations resolved the standoff, with Russia agreeing to deploy peacekeepers across Kosovo independently of NATO. The first elections after the war took place in November 2001. After the war, Russia, the EU and the US began discussing on what to do with the region. However, failing to reach any agreement, Kosovo declared independence from Serbia on the 17th of February 2008. Today, over 100 nations recognize Kosovo, with nearly half of all other countries claiming it is part of Serbia. Most Kosovars love America, with songs written about how great they are, and you can even find statues of Bill Clinton in the cities. As I mentioned earlier, compared to other European states, Kosovo has the worst Human Development Index of 0.75, with only Moldova not far ahead with an HDI of 0.76. Because of this, between 2012 and 2022, over 338,000 people emigrated from Kosovo, and about 30% of young people say that they are planning to move out of the country. Reports also suggest that Kosovo and Albania have become Europe's main drug transit hubs over the past 20 years, connecting cocaine from Africa and heroin from Turkey. An estimated 50 tons of heroin pass through Kosovo annually, generating over 3 billion euros in profits, which is equivalent to Kosovo's entire 2024 budget. In fact, German investigators have found out that 32 Albanian organized crime groups control the entire European cocaine trade, from production to street-level sales. Tony Blair, a key sponsor of NATO's intervention against Serbia, likely never imagined that 25 years later, the UK would face an influx of Albanian asylum seekers linked to drug and human trafficking as a consequence of their liberation from Serbian police. Today, the only country that's worse than Kosovo is Ukraine, though this depends on which region of Ukraine you're located in. As Serbs still make up around 5% of the population, violent protests between Serbs and Kosovo armed police still occur, with the most recent one in 2023 resulting in 30 NATO soldiers being injured. Despite this, both Serbia and Kosovo are trying to mend relations through negotiations, and perhaps one day, Kosovo might truly become an independent state or rejoin Serbia. Do you now understand?
Thank you, USA, you are my best friend. You are the peacekeeper, you are the legend. Thank you, USA, you are my best friend. You are the peacekeeper, you are the legend.